Excellent. Welcome to Hacks and Jacks on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. My name is Brett Ford. I'm here with Scott Chu, the author of the Top 300 Hitters, the hitter list on Pitcher List. Scott, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm talking about baseball again to someone besides myself. So this is big. This is big news. Like usually, for the last couple of weeks, I've just been like nose in the keyboard, just like typing away at this, top 300 list. I mean, it's blurbs on 300 players, right? I've been talking to myself a lot about baseball. So it is great to talk to another human being about it.
Yeah, we're excited to dig into that top 300 hitters list. It's on pitcherlist.com. Obviously, we've seen you put about 50,000 words down and excited to dig into that with you. So before we get there, we're going to start with some news and notes because we've got real baseball going on. We've got spring training baseball. And of course, with real baseball come real injuries, unfortunately. So let's dive into those real quick. Chase DeLauder, Guardians outfielder prospect, suffered a sports hernia. He's going to be out for 3 months or so. Scott, is he maybe a waivers guy in August or September?
I mean, he probably was going to be that anyway. Again, I'm mostly talking from the context of like a 12-team league, and he's a neat prospect. He's someone that like you should kind of have your eye on because he's definitely got real power. And he's got an okay hit tool. He certainly takes his walks. I'm kind of curious to see what that would look like in the major leagues. Sometimes we see these guys who can take a lot of walks and keep the strikeouts down in the minors, but when they get to the majors, they get exposed a little bit on breaking balls. I haven't dove all the way in on DeLauder and how he does with that. But again, he was going to be someone that's probably going to, that was probably going to be like sort of on the back of your mind until later in the season. When he comes up, assuming, there's room for him, the Guardians don't have this like super deep hitting roster, but they do have guys ahead of him, right? Like, because he would have been fighting with like John Kenzie Noel, and he would have been, there's not DH at bats. They already give those to Kyle Manzardo. They don't have like a bunch of solid outfielders, but as long as Kwan and Thomas are healthy, they were going to be out there. So he'll be interesting, but again, it's all going to be about role. Is he going to play? And, he should by the time they call him up, but now we're talking about late summer, early fall at the earliest. So again, a name to remember, Chase DeLauder, but not one that you're going to be doing anything with, even in like a draft and hold. He's probably not so much on my list because that's a long time to wait.
Yeah, he's a prospect that's kind of suffered a lot of injuries coming up, and it's a shame to see him out again with a little bit of hype coming into 2025. But the Guardians will have to make other plans in their outfield. Speaking of making other plans, the Atlanta Braves starting catcher Sean Murphy is going to miss some time. He suffered a broken rib in spring training. He's going to be out for at least 6 to 8 weeks, and I believe that meant he was going to be shut down for 6 to 8 weeks. And then would work back after that. With Murphy out of the mix, he was your number 196 ranked hitter on your top 300. And he was the Braves starting catcher. Do we look elsewhere at catcher? Obviously, he's going to be off draft boards in most places. Maybe he has a replacement in Atlanta that might be interesting.
I mean, Drake Baldwin is interesting as a catching prospect. Folks coming out of football can sort of relate catching prospects to tight end prospects, and that most of them don't hit right away because they have to learn two elements of the game that are very, very different from where they were, right? Like, yeah, everybody has to learn to like play defense at the major league level, but as an outfielder, that's really not all that different from what you were doing before. At catcher, it's very, very different because it's a different staff. It's guys with a lot of different weapons. It's a very different feel for them. So it can take some time before catching prospects really start hitting to begin with, but Drake Baldwin is one of the top prospects in baseball, particularly at catcher. He's a guy who has a hit tool. He's a guy who has power. He hit, 28 home runs. 30 home runs, I think. In the last 2 seasons in the minors, right? 32 home runs over the last 2 seasons. So he's, he's got some real pop for a catcher. However, right, as you mentioned, I already was out on Sean Murphy. Right. I was not that impressed by him. I know he's shown us in the past that Sean Murphy can be a very useful fantasy catcher, but quite frankly, it's been a while since he's been someone. I mean, last year they had plenty of opportunities to start Sean Murphy more, and they just didn't, right? Like they just let him sit on the bench a lot more than they needed to. So I was having a hard time buying in anyway. So I was already, he wasn't off my draft board, but if you look at where I ranked him and where Sean Murphy gets drafted, generally, he was functionally off my draft board. His backup isn't, I mean, he's someone I might put on a watch list if, because like in a single catcher league, you're going to have one of two strategies at catcher with how that position breaks down. You're either going to take one that you're like locked in every day, let's do it, or you're waiting basically till the end of your draft and saying, I'll take whatever one kind of comes to me. And if I'm in that boat, then maybe I put Drake Baldwin on my watch list to be like, hey, let's see if this kid comes out and hits. But again, rookie catchers often don't, right? And we don't even know, like, he's a lefty. Chadwick Tromp, their other catcher, is a righty. Is it going to be a platoon situation, right? Are they going to make this rookie go out every single day like they might have with Sean Murphy, even though they didn't last year? Like, maybe, probably not. So again, in a single catcher league, he's not really on your radar unless you just you're planning to wing it at catcher anyway. But if you're in a 2-catcher league, yeah, sure, maybe stick him on the watch list. But again, I'm not really doing anything more than that with Drake Baldwin. There's a lot of risk, not just in performance, but also in playing time.
Yeah, really the only thing appealing about Baldwin is his lineup context. The Atlanta Braves going to be one of the strongest offenses again in 2025. But other than that, it's kind of his best selling point.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how often he's going to play, and he's going to be in the bottom third of that order. And yeah, being in the bottom third of Atlanta's order is better than being in the bottom third of most batting orders, but it's still the bottom third. It's still it's a volume, there's a volume problem there to begin with. There's just other catcher. I don't want to say catcher is deep because I would call second base deep in that, there's a lot of guys you could be like, hey, you know what? I'm comfortable with this as my starting second baseman. Catcher isn't necessarily deep that way, but it's deep at the top. There's a bunch of guys now who are locked in high volume everyday guys. Whereas it used to be 3 or 4 catchers qualified for batting title. A lot more of them do that now, right? There's just a larger pool of guys who get a lot of volume, which makes guys like Drake Baldwin, who are unlikely to play every day when they're in the lineup or when they're on the roster, they just move even further off the radar because it's not only am I wondering if they have enough talent to be as good as the middle tiers of catcher, I know they're not going to play as much. So it creates a very difficult position to try to rely on a rookie catcher. But again, dynasty folks, folks that are, kind of prospecting, Drake Baldwin, that is someone to be excited about long-term, just not for redraft 2025.
So that kind of wraps up our major injuries, or at least the ones with a lot of missed time, or we hope. As we get into spring training, obliques are popping all over the Grapefruit League and the Cactus League like champagne bottles. Gunnar Henderson might miss opening day. He just had an oblique pop off. How does that affect your outlook on the Orioles shortstop season this year?
So this is the time of spring training where it's very easy to get very panicky, right? Because it's anyone that gets hurt right now with more than I hurt my finger kind of thing, we're starting to be yeah, this guy might miss opening day, right? But let's keep 2 things in mind. Number one, the beginning weeks of baseball, there's a lot of canceled games. There's not actually as many games in, let's say, the first week of the major league season as there would be in middle of the season, right? Teams are very quick to go to double headers. There's a lot of gross weather. There's, all kinds of things that are just sort of spacing the season out a little. But with Gunnar Henderson, am I concerned that he's missing opening day? Sure. It's a core injury. That's never fun. I prefer guys don't have core injuries, crazy take, I know, but I prefer they don't have them. However, does this change? Is Gunnar Henderson all of a sudden out of my, top 10, right? I had him at number 9 on the hitter list. Is he out of my top 10? Maybe, right? It was already kind of close between Gunnar Henderson and Fernando Tatis Jr. Mookie Betts is in that spot. Vlad Guerrero Jr. is there. It was already kind of tough. But he's not leaving the first, this is technically my second tier. He's not leaving the second tier. He is someone that you are considering in the first round of every draft. And even if they tell me he's going to miss the first week of the season, fine. Right? I kind of was and I kind of assumed he'd miss about, like, every player is going to miss about a week, right? Yes, last season Gunnar Henderson played 159 games, but like, you don't project guys to play 160, right? You do it at 150 because there's things like this that happen. So, does it change anything? Not really. When we start talking about, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, then I start getting a little, that's when I really start moving these guys that are at the top. But this, I mean, I guess if you're really stuck between two players, again, if you're like, man, I really don't know if I want Gunnar Henderson or Fernando Tatis Jr., even that's a tough one, right? Because it's like Fernando Tatis Jr. is probably going to miss a week or two or three at some point in the season, right? Injuries have been an issue for him too. So it's really hard to say like, oh, now that I know he's missing opening day, there's a big change. There's really not. It just doesn't do enough. And you can talk yourself into saying like, oh, but it's his core. And what if it nags all season? Like, good thing it's the spring and they can actually shut him down and let it get better. Cause that's the problem with core injuries, is that it's really hard to rest them while you're playing, right? When you're playing through and like your team, it's when it's June and your team's trying to stay in the thick of things and they're going to have you play through it. Your core just gets engaged constantly. So it's hard to get rest. So Gunnar Henderson having this happen in spring is better than it happening in the middle of the season. There's a chance he can get some rest here and be good to go. Even if it's not opening day, it's a week or two later.
So you have Gunnar Henderson ranked 9th in the hitter list. Your next shortstop on the list is not Fernando Tatis. He's number 10. Your next shortstop on the list is Francisco Lindor at 20. If you're faced with a decision here, are you looking at Gunnar or are you looking at Lindor?
Oh, not close. It's Gunnar, right? Like I want Gunnar. Like in some leagues, you'll get Mookie Betts, who's available at shortstop in like the Yahoo leagues where it's 5 starts. Like, so you might be able to get Mookie Betts. And like that was already kind of close because between Gunnar and Mookie, it has nothing to do with the injury. It's the fact that Mookie also plays second base and he's by far the best candidate to play second base, right? Like, none of the any of the arguments you were having about Gunnar Henderson and if you were taking him with your first pick somewhere in the middle to back half of the first round, those arguments are all exactly the same. I don't think this injury changes anything about that analysis. You do the exact same analysis you did before. Maybe it makes things a little closer. Maybe if you were truly tied, it was absolutely 100% equal. Now you might say, well, maybe this tips you over the edge, but like it's a grain of sand on the scale, right? That's it.
Well, we're talking about oblique injuries, and now we've got a pair of Texas Rangers on the list. Adolis Garcia and Wyatt Langford both are suffering from oblique injuries. And according to a tweet from Kennedy Landry, Bruce Bochy said Adolis Garcia's oblique strain is pretty mild and not quite a grade 1. They expect him to be back quicker than Wyatt Langford, who has also been delayed with an oblique injury this spring. Both will more than likely be ready for opening day, although obviously Langford is a little bit up in the air. How do we feel about the two Texas Rangers outfielders moving forward?
Yeah, again, it's a question of like, will they be ready on the exact day, right? And, Wyatt Langford still getting into some action, right? I believe he is suffering from the oblique. I think he got in a little bit today at DH. I don't know if he's ready to play the outfield yet. These sorts of things, right? It comes up because it potentially impacts their opening day status for that one day, for that one series even, right? But until I start hearing it's more than, once we start talking about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then I'll be concerned. But otherwise, it's like, if you like Wyatt Langford, this changes nothing, right? It's still a guy you're going to have to target maybe a little earlier than you might have thought coming into draft season, but he continues to kind of move up. Adolis Garcia, I'm a fan because of his price is so low now. I think people have completely written him off, but like Adolis Garcia was still a top 100 hitter last year, right? As bad as he felt, right? Like he was a top 100 hitter. It just, if you use the Fangraphs player rater, he was batter number 87, right? He was overall player 135, right? And you get him a lot cheaper than that. And yes, yeah, sure. You probably don't love the fact he hit 224, but he still hit 25 bombs. He drove in 85 runners and stole 11 bags, right? Like if you just say, okay, that's what he's going to do again, right? Which I think he very well can. He's getting older, but he only just turned 32, right? Like this month, he's actually got the same birthday as my mom, right? Like I don't, he's not like decrepitly old here. His skill set can keep going for a little while. I think he's being undervalued, and I kind of hope that this injury makes people even more off on him because I love him as a back end outfielder in pretty much every format. I rank him higher than his ADP, and that's just because I think he can still play. I think he can still perform. Again, he's not like the world beater was before, but I rank him as hitter number 80, which is again close to where he finished last season, and I think he can be better than that. That whole offense really struggled last year. It didn't really pick up till the second half of the year. Wyatt Langford coming in and assuming he is ready to go, that offense is going to look a lot different than it did last year. I think Adolis Garcia is someone who, again, being undervalued because of the rough year, and it's easy to say like, oh, well, it's over because we have, we're very fickle here in the fantasy world, but he's a guy that you really should be looking at the back end of your outfield, who again is probably going to fall into your lap. There's not people reaching for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Rangers outfield, it really can bounce back this year. The whole Rangers offense kind of had that World Series hangover last year that you touched on, and kind of seeing their prices depressed a little bit this year. Maybe Langford might be the exception there, but seeing that Rangers offense not nearly as highly regarded as it was coming into 2024 is definitely an opportunity to target those bats. Moving on to the final two oblique injuries of our news and notes section. These two both, as we've received more news, it seems that they're less serious injuries. Christian Walker, who was out for quite a while last year with an oblique injury, had what appeared to be a repeat injury, went for an MRI, and is now headed back to camp with no sprain of the oblique, which is great news. And then Tyler O'Neill was pulled with some soreness. Now with the Baltimore Orioles, O'Neill also appears to be on the mend and should be back in spring training action if he isn't already. So those might be two other opportunities for drafters who, see that little red Q or little red notation next to those two guys with injury notes, and they might be able to pounce on them at a depressed price.
It sounds silly, but that's actually what happens in a lot of cases. We draft with our guts a lot. And when we see like, oh, he's kind of injured, instantly people start pushing him down a list, even though it's like, this isn't actually something that's likely to impact him for opening day for the rest of the season. It's not some lingering thing. So, Christian Walker, I hope that kind of happens, right? Cause he's still a heck of a player. He missed a fair chunk of time last season, but he played 160 games and 157. Last year was 130 after he missed some time. He's definitely someone to have on your list. First base is an interesting position to go after in drafts. So he's in that sort of middle of the boat in the ranks, like in terms of like a 12-team starter. So he's someone you should really have an idea about when you're going in. As far as Tyler O'Neill, like, of course, he's always hurt, man. Like he's always dealing with something, right? And the fact that it's spring, that just means he's in mid-season form, right? Dealing with some soreness or whatever. So it's fine. Like, I'm not worried about Tyler O'Neill because if you had Tyler O'Neill and be like, yeah, but that's because I think he's going to play 140 games, then you're asking him to do something he has literally never done in his entire career. I'm cherry picking a little bit. He played 138 games back in 2021, but like the dude, he played 113 games last season, and that's the most he had played since 2021. So you already knew he was going to miss some time. You get Tyler O'Neill because yes, he's going to slump when he's healthy. He's not even one of those guys that like when he's healthy, he performs. That's actually not how Tyler O'Neill works. Tyler O'Neill is incredibly streaky. He has these huge up and down swings, but he's capable of just absolutely blowing the box score apart for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And by the end of the season, yeah, that looks like 31 home runs in 113 games like he did last season. He's capable of that. It's a very painful path to get there. Again, it's not just like when he's healthy, he's great. It's actually not how it works. It's extremely streaky. It's very up and down. There's going to be times you feel like dropping him. However, you're not getting him because he's like this stalwart that's going to play every game. You get him because, hey, I'm in a league that has IL spots. I can, especially in like a 3 outfield league, Tyler O'Neill is still a great guy to target because the outfield replacement level is so high in those formats. There's always going to be outfielders you can plug in when Tyler O'Neill is slumping or when he's not healthy. And when he is healthy, plug him back in, like, just try to ride the snake there, get every little piece of, juice that you can get, every drop while he's in, because he's going to hit like 4 home runs in a week. And then he's going to go back to being not very good for a bit. That's okay, because in a shallow outfield league, you can handle that all day long.
Yeah, my wife doesn't really care about his injury history. She just likes that he's built like an American gladiator. So she has him like 100% of draft shares of Tyler O'Neill.
Oh yeah, I mean he's again like when you have that many muscles, it's easy to hurt them, right? I wouldn't know what that's like, but I get how that happens, and as far as like ability goes, he's got all of it. It's just between the health and the inconsistency, the swing and miss in his game. It's an up and down ride. But again, at the end, you get really good stats. It's just, are you able to sort of like hang on tight on that roller coaster and just get all the way through to the end?
Well, we've got a few more injuries to touch on in the news and notes section. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll get back to the last round of our injuries here. Welcome back to Hacks and Jacks. It's Scott Chu and Brett Ford here, bringing you the best of the bats here in spring training as we prepare for our fantasy drafts. And we're talking news and notes. We're talking spring training injuries. Scott, this next one isn't so much of an injury, or at least he's performing like he doesn't have an injury in spring training. But Dave Roberts came out and spoke about Los Angeles Dodgers first baseman Freddie Freeman, and basically explained that he's going to be working with Freeman on some load management, maybe not playing him in day games after night games, and maybe kind of taking it a little easier on the power hitting first baseman. His spring training, of course, Dave Roberts comes out and says that, and then Freddie Freeman hits a bomb in his first spring training at bat immediately after. Any thoughts on Freeman or Roberts' comments on Freeman?
Not necessarily, right? So Freddie Freeman, he's like a little more than a year younger than me. So I get like load management's a big deal. Like I can't do housework and I can't do certain types of housework 2 days in a row. I can't like do yard work 2 days in a row. I don't have that in me anymore. Freddie Freeman has a ton of tread on those tires, right? Like he's still going to be able to play a lot, right? But instead of 159 to 162 games every season, maybe it looks more like 150. Maybe he plays like a normal person amount of games, right? Like we're not talking about like rules where it's like, oh, it's my closer's never going to pitch 2 games in a row. That's not the type of load management we're talking about here. We're talking about occasionally, right? Like when they have 7 games in a week, maybe he takes the day game off, right? Again, like there might be some more Sunday day games that, Freeman doesn't come in till like towards the end if it's close, right? That's fine. Like, am I worried about him getting to 600, 650 plate appearances? No, right? Now, 700, which he's done many times the last couple of years, like maybe he doesn't get there. Maybe this news tells us that maybe a little bit of the volume comes off, but not enough that changes anything about like any real projections you might have. Didn't change any. I mean, if you're not changing any of those things. It's like, hey, look, he's a little older. He's not going to play. I can't expect him to play 160 games, but 145 to 150, which is a full-time player. Yeah, he'll still do that. So I'm not really concerned.
Speaking of guys who can't do yard work on consecutive days, we got another veteran here in Sal Perez. He suffered a little bit of a bruise under his eye. We'll assume that may have been from taking catching reps. Talk to me about Sal Perez. Are you concerned at all for him coming into the season?
Salvador Perez is seemingly invincible, actually. The dude, I mean, he plays a ton. He played 158 games last season. We've seen him play like a little less. But again, he's one of those guys that even as a catcher, he's always gotten his plate appearances, right? He's going to get more plate appearances than most catchers. He's still a guy who, I think you should be valuing a lot. I think he's only gotten to 100 RBI twice, right? Once during his 2021 when he hit a bazillion home runs, and once last season he got to 140 or 104 RBI because that offense is doing better in Kansas City. Again, changes nothing. He's always dealing with something because he's a catcher, right? But he still gets his games in every single year. He's a guy who I think there's people that are worried about like being the one left holding the bag on Sal Perez, but don't think like that, right? Like that's first of all, that's not a fun way to think. It's lame. But also, Sal Perez, he's a top 50 hitter. He continues to like perform as a top 50 hitter every single year. He was actually a top 20 hitter last season. You don't have to pay that kind of price for him. You can actually, you can pay top 50 and still get him. So yeah, he's a player I end up with a lot just because there's always someone who's like, oh, well, like there's certain stats that suggest maybe he's slowing down. Nope, not yet. I'll believe it when I see it. Weirdly enough, career high walk rate for Sal Perez last year. It's still a below average walk rate, but it was career high, right? Like he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, old dog, new tricks, right? We go from one of the longest tenured veterans in the league to a bat who's still rookie eligible. Junior Caminero, Tampa Bay Rays third baseman, left Thursday's spring training game with low back tightness. One of the most hyped rookies coming into this season. How do we feel about Caminero?
Well, I'm not concerned that much about the injury, right? Like they're calling him day to day right now. We're still several weeks out from actual baseball, like with the games that count. So I'm not too worried about it. Getting reps in spring training is important for a player like Caminero, but he's already gotten some. It's not like he hasn't played at all in the spring. As far as, Caminero is concerned, I mean, he's already hit three home runs this spring. But I'm a little more concerned about the fact that like the hype keeps moving up on him. That's where it's been tough to draft him. Not because I don't like him. I thought I liked him a lot. And then I got into drafts and realized how much people liked him even more than I did. So it's been a struggle to get my hands on Caminero, even in like mock drafts, because people keep just really wanting him on their team, which I get because he showed like it didn't show up in the stat book like the way you might think. But if you look at some of the rolling charts we've got with our PLV metrics, he got a lot more aggressive towards the end of the season last year. And people tend to think that's a bad thing, but Caminero's got high level contact ability. This dude can make contact with a lot of balls, even if like they're tough pitches, he can hit them. So you want him to swing, right? He's a strong kid. He's someone who can make contact on difficult pitches. That means you want him to swing, right? I know like we always think about the ideal hitter is Juan Soto. Makes you throw him perfect, like makes you throw him stuff right in the zone, and then he goes and hits it, right? But in reality, very few players are going to have that kind of discipline. Junior Caminero doesn't have that kind of discipline, but that's okay. We don't want him to be passive. If you can hit the ball hard, hit the ball, right? Like, swing hard, hit it. So I'm a fan of Junior Caminero. I haven't been able to draft him because other people are even bigger fans. But if that's you, I get it because this guy's got a lot of ability and finally a role that appears to be pretty locked in, assuming he stays healthy.
We move on from Caminero to New York Mets outfielder Brandon Nimmo. Suffered a knee injury in spring training. Nimmo ranked 84th in your in your hitter list. Pretty strong ranking for Nimmo. What are we thinking with maybe a knee injury lingering as we look to approach opening day?
It's weird. Nimmo used to be this guy that was very injury prone. And I always make kind of the joke of a guy's considered injury prone till he isn't, and a guy's considered durable till he isn't. Right. So we had multiple seasons where Nimmo had a hard time staying on the field. Up until 2022, he only had one season where he played 100 games. And then all of a sudden he plays 150 games 3 seasons in a row. Right. We didn't see any real, it doesn't appear to be any major injury to his knee. It's just swollen. He had a rough second half last year, but he still finished as almost a top 50 hitter. He's, he finished ultimately like as a top 80 overall player. So he hits third. I think the Mets offense is going to be improved. Nimmo is someone who should get plenty of volume. In OBP leagues, I think you move him up even more. I think he got kind of unlucky. The BABIP went way down last season. I know some people, I don't always use BABIP anymore, and there is some evidence to suggest that his quality of contact was a little bit worse than it had been in years before, but he still hit the ball hard a lot, right? 47.4 hard hit rate. The barrel rate was about the same as it had been in the previous seasons where he'd had much better batting averages. I think that's going to move back up. So Nemo, a guy I'm still after. Don't read too much into that 224 batting average. What you should be reading into is the fact that this dude scores runs, right? 88, 89, and 102 runs over the last 3 seasons. The RBI numbers are sometimes a little bit lower because he was leading off a lot, but he's now going to be hitting he might be hitting a little bit lower in the lineup at times this season. So Nemo, again, hitting in the top third of what is a much improved batting order. I think he's actually going to hit like 3rd or 4th now. So the RBI are going to go up, but there's plenty, there's still plenty to get from him. He's underrated because he doesn't do anything flashy, but Nemo, a guy that you definitely want to pick up. There's a lot of plate appearances in a very, very nice lineup spot.
Yeah, if he can get at the bat and get on base against, or in front of Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos in that Mets lineup, and Francisco Alvarez sitting right behind them, that's a lot of power following him in the lineup, and really good context, like you said, for runs scored. We'll move on to 2 kind of freak injuries here. Jeimer Candelario, our Cincinnati Reds corner infielder, is missing some time due to a wisdom tooth. You ever had your wisdom teeth pulled, Scott?
No, I've been putting that off. But so it'll be a couple days for Candelario. This might be the only time we talk about Candelario. He had a miserable second half last season. He's probably gonna start a little bit, but Jeimer Candelario is basically the guy that's in the way of Christian Encarnacion Strand getting some time. That's who we actually want to see get into the action. Candelario might play some first base. He might play some third base here and there. The Reds just sort of have this hodgepodge, especially with Spencer Steer looking like he's going to miss some time to start the season. That's one of the guys whose ranks I am going to be changing due to injury because I wasn't that high on him in the first place. And now he's giving some opportunity to a guy like Christian Encarnacion Strand, who really has the ability to run away with this. He might not, but he's opening that door to a player who has a ton of power and could hit a ton of home runs in the Coors of the East. So, this is less about Jeimer Candelario. It's more about the guys who could benefit from Candelario being out of the lineup, although the loss of Spencer Steer for the Reds is a bigger sort of mover in terms of value. Again, primarily for Christian Encarnacion Strand.
Yeah, don't forget that Noelvi Marte is still there. He might be 22 years old now, but Marte with the PED suspension last year was a promising, hyped prospect coming up, and then kind of disappeared after the suspension. So he is still in the Reds depth chart there. Not sure what kind of opportunity he'll get, but having Candelario and Steer miss some time might open a door for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, he was putrid last season when he played. He didn't play that well. He played 66 games. He was horrible, right? He stole some bases, but that was about it. I'm not sure the Reds are like that interested in getting him up there yet. I think he's going to be more of he's on the 40-man roster kind of thing. So he'll get some kind of look, but I think this team, the Reds, they'd really rather see Christian Encarnacion Strand step up and take and demand and force them into starting him every day. That's the dream for us as fantasy players and for the Reds. We all want the same thing. That's Christian Encarnacion Strand to hit a bunch of dingers and be a part of this lineup every single day. He has not earned that yet, but he has the ability to, so that's what we're rooting for.
We'll stay in the NL Central to talk about our last injury of the news and notes section. Jordan Walker hurt himself stepping on a sprinkler. If things couldn't get worse for the Cardinals this year, coming into the 2025 season, this could be the cherry on top of the proverbial sundae.
Yeah, Jordan Walker, I mean, the injury is weird, right? What stinks is that if he misses more time in the spring, what we needed to see from Jordan Walker in the spring, we already know he can hit the ball hard, right? We already know that about Jordan Walker. We already know that he's that kind of person. What I wanted to see and what he had sort of done, again, incredibly small sample, but he got the ball in the air. That's what we need Jordan Walker to do, especially against big league pitching. This dude needs to get the ball up in the air because it doesn't matter how hard you hit it. When you hit 50% of the, 45 to 50% of the time you hit it into the ground, it doesn't matter how hard you hit it, right? A hard hit grounder, the only difference between a hard hit grounder and a soft hit grounder is the likelihood of a single. That's it, right? That's it. That is not, we don't get Jordan Walker to get singles, right? He's supposed to be hitting the ball up in the air, pulling it, and showing us that power. He was starting to do it a little bit, and I hope that this, missing some time because of this stupid sprinkler doesn't derail that, right? Now, again, this might just be an illusion. It's a very small sample size, blah, blah, blah. But man, I'd love to see if Jordan Walker were to play all spring and keep getting the ball in the air, he would fly up draft boards because that's what we are waiting for.
Yeah, so many fantasy managers have been burned by Jordan Walker in the past couple seasons that to see him succeed in spring would definitely be something that might A, surprise people, and B, get people excited one more time, just one more run with Jordan Walker.
Yeah, but it can't just be success, right? With Jordan Walker, very specifically, he has to succeed a certain way. If he's succeeding, but he's still hitting 50% ground balls, I'm really not that interested because that's not going to stick around. It's got to be with balls up in the air.
Well, speaking of outfielders who have made a kind of big adjustment, we'll talk about a guy who made a big adjustment in season last year. Lawrence Butler, the Athletics outfielder, signed a huge extension, 7 years, $66.5 million earlier this week. You want to talk about Butler? Give you a chance to talk about one of the most exciting outfielders in the major leagues.
One of the most out of nowhere players from last year. Let's remember that this guy, like, we knew as a prospect, we kind of knew that Butler had some power, but we did not expect anything like what we saw because like he played in the beginning of the year. He wasn't that good. Then out of nowhere, he just goes on fire, right? Starting in July, the dude just starts ripping the cover off the ball, ends the season with 22 home runs, 18 stolen bases, and a 262 average. He's actually raking in the spring too. Again, it's only 6 games, 17 plate appearances, but 2 home runs, barely striking out. He's a really hard player for me. Like, I really want to say like, oh yeah, I'm all in on Lawrence Butler, but there's a couple things that make that difficult. I rank him 53rd, which generally means I'm not going to get him a lot in drafts, but we are talking about a player who, as great as he was, we're talking about 50 games, right? We're talking, basically there were 50 games where he was an elite player, 1.05 OPS, beginning of July, the end of August, it's 50 games, 18 home runs, 8 steals, right? In those 50 games, that's enormous, right? That's like close to a 60 home run pace if you put it over the course of a whole season. But 50 I know I'm going to keep saying it, but it's 50 games. We see 50 game stretches from guys. Like, again, this is one of the more elite 50 game stretches we've seen from a player out of nowhere, but they are very different. But we see players do 50 games and then have a difficult time repeating anything like those 50 games that we saw, right? I think Lawrence Butler has a much higher floor than other guys who we've sort of seen these stretches from, right? Christopher Morel being a recent guy, we've seen him for 50 game stretches be unstoppable, right? We've seen we've seen Aristides Aquino is one that is like sort of classic to use, right? Because he set like the rookie record for home runs in a certain number of plate appearances, right? And then he totally disappeared. There was a lot of flaws to his game, and Lawrence Butler doesn't have those. But it's worth noting that if you're good enough to get in the big leagues, you're also good enough to have stretches where you look really, really good. That's why you're in the big leagues, right? So, what you shouldn't be doing is like extrapolating Lawrence Butler's 50 games into a whole season. Obviously, projections love the guy as well. They should, right? ATC's got him for 24 home runs, 19 stolen bases. I think the core of the Athletics offense is decent, right? Him and Brent Rooker, pretty decent. JJ Bleday is a decent player, right? This isn't quite the wasteland it's been in recent years, at least in terms of like the top half of the lineup. The bottom half is still like utter garbage because this is the most money I think that the Athletics have spent in an offseason in like decades, right? They gave 2 guys contracts, right? Like I can't believe this has happened. But with Lawrence Butler, there is power, there is speed. I think he's worth drafting. I just worry that someone's always going to like him more than me because the back of my mind's always going to tell me, but Scott, it's 50 games, right? Like I know he played 125 games last year, but 18 of those 22 home runs come in 50 games, right? The rest of it is actually not good at all. And I think those 50 games are more telling than the really bad stuff, but how much of those 50 games that Lawrence Butler can repeat is a huge question. And it's such a risk. Again, in a shallower league, I think it's fine to take the risk because there's a high replacement level in the outfield. But in a league with like 5 outfielders, I have a hard time saying I want Lawrence Butler as my number 2 outfielder, because it's going to be hard to replace that, especially if he ends up being more of like an average guy, right? Like what if he ends up just kind of being, like a 2020 season would be great, right? Where he hits 250. That'd be great, but that's not like a second outfielder, right? It's more like we're talking like third, fourth. I'm picking nits here a bit, but I don't want people to start thinking superstar already, just because, yes, I know that the StatCast data suggest he really did hit the ball hard, right? What he did in those 50 games was not smoke and mirrors. He actually did it. The question is, can he do it again to some extent over a longer period of time?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Scott. That sums up news and notes. We'll take a quick break and dive into this top 300 hitters list when we get back. Sorry for springing Butler on. I didn't realize he wasn't in my notes here.
No, it's good. That's fine. It's fine.
I have him in my other copy of the notes, so I apologize.
You're good.
All right. We'll dive into the 300 hitters list here, and then I'd like to try to keep this to hour 15 if we can.
Yeah, let's just do like the first 5 tiers.
Okay,
so that'll get it. Yeah.
All right. Welcome back to Hacks and Jacks. It's Brett Ford here with Scott Chu, author of the top 300 hitters, the hitters list on Pitcher List. Scott, we take a look at this article. How do you best suggest to kind of digest and apply, these 50,000 words, all this hard work that you've put into this article? How can we take that and apply it to, our draft strategies and our in-season management of our fantasy teams?
Read every single word. Just kidding. That would be lunacy. It's lunacy to write it. It'd be even worse to read every single word just from beginning to end. It is not that kind of novel, right? Like I don't recommend it. Although if you want to see like my sanity slowly start to fall apart, you might start to pick that up as you go through. I think our editors helped me hide that quite a bit, which is good. But so it's 37,000 words. So there is a list. If you're one of our PL pros, little plug here, PL Pro Plus, you actually have like just the list version of the whole 300 and of the top, and the position rankings across the board. But if you aren't a PL Pro, that's okay. You'll see a list version of the top 150. What you really should be doing generally is when you're in a drafter or you're doing your research, you're generally going to come upon a player that you're wondering about, right? Like you're not going to open this thing up and just start browsing, right? If you do, look for the charts. I think they're all very interesting. I love rolling charts. I always have. There's some very good ones in this article. Thank you, Kyle Bland, for a lot of the research, the research you've done to give us a lot of these charts. Thank you, Fangraphs, for making it very easy for me to create certain rolling charts. But generally, this should be part of like your player analysis, right? Because, again, I'm not the be all end all. You're going to have opinions about these players, but I might have said something that is interesting to you. Maybe it affirms what you already believe about a player, right? Maybe it reverts something you thought about a player, right? Maybe it puts a different context on what you saw, right? Maybe you have it's likely something about a player I don't, right? It's very, very realistic. However, I am hoping that this article, what it does is you're sitting there thinking like, man, Scott's really high on Brent Rooker, right? And I'm not sure if I should take him. You can at least see why I'm so high on him, because again, I wrote a blurb on all 300 players. This is not just some list with up and down arrows and occasional notes, right? This is words on every single guy. Towards the back, there's fewer words per player, right? But especially for those first couple of rounds, well, really like probably the first 10 rounds where the players are going to draft, I'm trying to give you quite a bit of analysis here when appropriate, right? Again, there's some guys that we already all know a lot about. There's not much for me to say, but I did try to spend some extra time talking about, players who, like, why am I so low on Bo Bichette, right? It's in there, right? I'm going to show you a graph why I'm not so crazy about it. You may disagree with me, but at least be able to see, if I disagree with you on where you're ranking a player, that's okay, right? At least try to see where I'm coming from and be able to say like, yeah, he's wrong. And this is why I think he's wrong. That is a very valuable exercise, right? To say like, yeah, Scott ranks Bryson Stott 111 out of the hitters. And I think he should be more like 80, right? Scott ranks him down here because of this, this, and that. And I think he's wrong because of this, right? Or I think he's underestimating what Stott can do in this way and that way. That's a very important exercise to go into your drafts because that's going to make you feel like you know what the heck you're doing, right? Not everyone's going to make rankings like this, right? In fact, I kind of recommend you don't if you'd like to stay a sane human being, be part of normal society. But if you're going to go into draft season, you're going to have some idea of, I like this guy, right? I like him. This is the second baseman I want, right? ADP will tell you when this guy's likely to get drafted, right? Looking at ADP and seeing the min pick, the max pick on like on average, where does this guy go? Using Bryson Stott as an example, that'll tell you when you need to draft him, right? Whether or not he's someone you target, right? You can look at my rankings and say like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of concerned because Stott, for example, had one absolutely amazing month. Actually an amazing 2-week period where he was a top 5 hitter in all of baseball. And for the rest of the season, he was really unimpressive, right? Statistically speaking, he was unimpressive. He was impressive in that he was an everyday major league player, something I could never be, and I could never train up for. However, as far as a fantasy second baseman, or shortstop, he wasn't there, right? It's all of that. I mean, not unlike Lawrence Butler, a lot of that production comes in this one period of time. And after that, he was a drag. So that's the argument I'm making why I pushed him down. So if you're going to push him up higher, you should at least be able to say, yes, Scott, I see that you've said that, but I think he's better than that. And here's why, right? You don't need to tell me that. I kind of hope you do, because I think it's an interesting discussion to have. And I like talking about baseball, but it's important to be able to say, I believe in this guy. Yeah, Scott doesn't. He's an idiot. This is why. It's very good context to have as you go.
Well, let's jump right into tier one, and this is 3 guys that you can't possibly mess up with. It contains Shohei Ohtani, Bobby Witt Jr., and Aaron Judge. Talk to me about your first tier, and why these 3 guys kind of separate from everybody else.
Yeah. So again, I don't always love making tiers that are this small, right? But when it comes to the number 1 tier, whenever I do a number 1 tier, the philosophy is these are the guys I can justify taking first overall, right? And this year, it's actually a little bit bigger than usual. It's 3. Now, I'll be real with you. I am taking Shohei Ohtani every single time, right? As I mentioned in the article, Shohei Ohtani is the only player to finish as a top 5 fantasy hitter in both 2023 and 2024. It's actually incredibly difficult to be a top 5 guy 2 years in a row. Shohei Ohtani did it, right? And I get it, right? Well, he's not going to be, he's not going to steal 50 bases again, right? No, but why not 30, right? Like everyone's talking about how he's pitching and it's going to make him go down. He's pitched and played lights out before, right? Shohei Ohtani is one of the most special players that has ever played the game. I want him on my team every single time. And if I have the first pick, I have one way to guarantee that, right? Like I take him first. So I do think you should take him every single time. However, I understand arguments for one, Aaron Judge, the elite home run hitter in baseball, right? He's the best power hitter in baseball. His only issue is health. If you told me Aaron Judge was going to play 150 games, right, then the discussion between him and Ohtani is tough, right? It's a lot tougher for me. What's interesting is how often I've been hearing about people saying, I want to take Bobby Witt first overall, right? And I think it's justifiable. That's why Bobby Witt Jr. is in my top tier, right? He just finished his age 24 season. He had a top 3 finish. We saw him take all the steps forward we wanted Witt Jr. to take last season. from 2023 to 2024, there were things we wanted him to do. He did all of them, right? Especially turning a lot of singles into extra base hits, right? He added a lot of extra base hits. The question is sort of like, how much more is there? Right? Like, I do think Bobby Witt Jr. can do the thing where he's a back-to-back top 5, fantasy player. I think that's very realistic. But the question is, like, what does Bobby Witt have another level? And I don't mean this in a negative way, but I think the answer is no. Right? I think this is what Bobby Witt is. He is a 30-30 guy, right? Maybe he has a couple more stolen bases here and there. But I think in terms of top end potential, he doesn't quite have what Shohei Ohtani has, right? But he's still, I get why you might do it first overall, because you're like, oh, well, I think he's the most durable of this group, because he is, right? And if it's dynasty, again, different conversation. And I'm talking, of course, about leagues where Ohtani is split. If Ohtani is a single player and it's daily, it is Ohtani first, second, and third overall. It's the only choice. Like, let's get that out of the way. But if you're in a league where it's just hitter Ohtani, I still think he's the number 1 draft pick. However, if you choose Bobby Witt Jr., it's because you really want the durability, right? And it's more about your concerns about Judge and Ohtani than it is about Bobby Witt Jr. being objectively better than them, right? That's just not how it's going to work, I think. And you can disagree with me if you want. However, to me, it's more of, I think there's too much risk in Ohtani and Judge. That's why I'm going with, not if they all play, because if I told you they all play 160 games, Bobby Witt Jr. just isn't going to be your number 1 pick. It's going to be one of the other 2 guys. And that's okay, right? Not a knock on Bobby Witt Jr. He's among the elite players in baseball. But if I was to say only one of these guys plays 150 games this year, the money is on Bobby Witt Jr., right? By a lot. He's the major favorite to get to 150 games versus the other 2. If I told you only one did. So that's why you pick Bobby Witt Jr. But again, I generally pick Ohtani every single time.
Well, you can't go wrong with any of those 3 guys at number 1 overall. Unless, of course, Ohtani is a single player, and then you can go wrong because it
is a great year to pick third. If I had, in those leagues where you have like a KDS, right? Like, when do you want to pick? Picking third is great because your decision is made for you, right? Like, you're going to get one of those 3 guys guaranteed, right? And as much as I love Tarek Skubal, which is an unreasonable amount, absolutely not in the top 3, right? It's one of those 3 guys. If it's pure objective and you don't have your heart set on one of those guys like I do, which is Shohei Ohtani, objectively speaking, third is an amazing place to pick.
Well, the good news is we got in our contractual obligation of mentioning Tariq Skubal in the pot, so that's good. But we're going to move on to the second tier. We've got tier 2 that runs from number 4, Jose Ramirez, Cleveland Guardians third baseman, all the way down to number 12 with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the Blue Jays for now, first baseman. Talk to me about tier 2 and the bats you like here.
Yeah, so I think the first guy I want to call out is someone who, little pat on my back here. I was higher on Elly De La Cruz last year than a lot of other folks. They were worried about those strikeout rates, and guess what? Elly De La Cruz did strike out over 30% of the time again, and I don't care, right? Because he walked more. He got the ground ball rate improved, as in he hit less of them. I can swallow a 31.3% strikeout rate when Elly De La Cruz is actually all Elly De La Cruz has to be is not the worst decision maker in the league, right? As long as he's not the worst decision maker in the league, which he wasn't last year, that power and speed shines through every single time. Again, now, as I mentioned in the article, if you're a points leaguer and strikeouts hurt you, yeah, you got to move him down. But in a standard league, strikeouts are a problem in that they can hurt your batting average and they're a non-value add plate appearance. However, most leagues, strikeouts aren't a direct stat. It doesn't matter if you strike out 31.3% of the time if you're still making the numbers. That is something Elly De La Cruz can do. He proved it once. He's going to prove it again this coming season. So don't be afraid of Elly De La Cruz. Don't get too hung up on the 30% strikeout rates, right? Again, it is because he is an elite talent. He's a mold breaker type player. Normally, we don't like guys who strike out 30% of the time. unless, of course, they are uber athletes who are incredibly fast, hit in one of the best stadiums to hit in baseball, right? And get to hit near the top of the lineup every day, right? Ellie De La Cruz is a special player. Treat him special. Don't worry about the 30% strikeout rate. The
Yeah.
other guy I want to, sorry, go ahead.
No, Ellie De La Cruz kind of reminds me of the baseball version of Lamar Jackson, where he's got literally all the talent you could possibly want, and it just comes down to his decision making, whether or not he's doing the right thing or not. So yeah, I'm all aboard with Ellie De La Cruz, and hopefully he has a season. I don't anticipate him to steal 90 bags or whatever it was last year again, but I could totally see him going for like a 25-50 season.
Yeah, and let's be clear, like he had a 31.3% strikeout rate. He still hit 260. Right? Like 259, technically. I think he's going to do that again, right? All the numbers are there. And when we talk about like, could a player have another level? Like, actually, Ellie De La Cruz could. Now, statistically speaking, he is unlikely to ever become a guy who doesn't strike out that much, right? He's always going to be a guy that strikes out a lot. But the beauty of decision making is it's the only like purely mental part of the game, right? If somehow he got that strikeout rate down to like 25%, there's another level to his game because he could hit 280, right? This dude puts a lot of hard contact out there. So I'm a huge fan of Ellie De La Cruz. I will continue to be, just because, again, there's not very, like, the types of players with this kind of physical talent dry up in your draft really, really fast. And if you get a chance to get one, I suggest you do so, right? Dude hits the ball very, very hard. He's getting the ball in the air. Yeah, he strikes out a lot, but again, who cares? Because everything else works, right? Again, later in this discussion, I'm going to be like, oh man, he strikes out too much. It doesn't work. But Ellie De La Cruz is special, which means we get to say, like, we don't care that he does that, right? Because he's got 30 home run power, right? If he could be 30, like he could absolutely be 30-50, 30-60, right? The Reds are insanely aggressive on the base paths. There's so much potential here. There's more to his game, right? Like this is a special player. Do not hesitate to grab him in the first round. And the other player who I think people do hesitate with and who I can just continue to push up my rankings, and this isn't necessarily for everybody, but Yordan Alvarez. I adore Yordan Alvarez because when you talk about elite hitter, Yordan Alvarez is, so I love rolling charts, right? And I mentioned this in the article. The worst 50 game sample of Yordan Alvarez's career, his entire career, the worst 50 game sample, he had a WRC plus of 114. At his very, very worst, he was 14% better than MLB average. And you're like, yeah, well, he's really good. Like, you know how hard it is to have your worst 50 game sample be still better than an average player, right? Like, that is insane. He is, I talked earlier about how, hey, Tyler O'Neill, sometimes when he's healthy, he isn't very good. Yordan Alvarez is the guy who, when he plays, he is a monster, right? And let's be clear. Yordan Alvarez last season, his counting stats were a bit low, but like, how did he have 30 hits in May and 4 RBI? Yordan Alvarez had 30 hits and 4 RBI in the month of May, right? Yes, there's an injury risk with Yordan Alvarez. You all know it, but especially in like a 12-team league, I think I continue to draft Yordan Alvarez. I've been at the turn in several drafts. I'm at the turn in NFBC. And guess what? I grabbed Yordan Alvarez because he's an absolute monster. I know he's always going to hit when he's out there. Sure, the Houston offense might not be quite what it's been in the last couple of years, but Yordan Alvarez is still Yordan Alvarez. He's one of the best hitters in the game of baseball, right? When we talk about Juan Soto, Yordan Alvarez is basically that level of hitter, right? He's just hurt more. He's that level of player. You should be absolutely scooping him up because if I said he played 150 game this year, then I've ranked him 8th and it's too low.
Yeah, usually when you think of like guys who just hit 30 home runs in their sleep, season by season, you think of kind of that high power, high strikeout rate kind of guy, that kind of archetype. And I mean, Jordan he had a 15% strikeout rate last year. Like that is absurdly low for such a crazy power hitter. So he's a guy that I absolutely love, especially in points leagues, where I can capitalize on, the fact that he's not only putting the ball in play, but he's also crushing it for power stats as well.
Again, like you're Jordan Alvarez, like the story is always that he's hurt, right? Like, yes, he is hurt a lot, but Jordan Alvarez, when he plays, he's so much better than people realize, right? Because like he has at least 30 home runs in all these seasons. Even the year he only played 114 games, he still hit 30 home runs, right? This dude is automatic when he's on the field. Don't like you can find, especially, this is something that Nick talks about with pitching. You can like he ranks Tyler Glasnow up really high because he's like, look, in a shallower league, you can make up the missed time when he's on the IL. That is absolutely true with Jordan Alvarez. And frankly, I keep thinking about moving him up higher. And the only reason Jordan Alvarez is 8th and not 6th or 7th is because of how much I love Ellie De La Cruz and Kyle Tucker, right? Like he only can't move up because the level of talent in Major League Baseball at the top is just insane right now. But yeah, Jordan Alvarez, look, he's this guy who every time you dig in on Jordan Alvarez, you find new things to love. That's how good he is. Yes, it's injury risk, but I'll take it because the upside is so high.
Well, let's move on to tier 3 here. Tier 3 in your hitter list runs from number 13, Los Angeles Dodgers first baseman Freddie Freeman. It includes 8 players going all the way down to number 20, New York Mets shortstop Francisco Lindor. A lot of young, exciting outfielders in this tier. Any bats you want to highlight here?
Yeah, but not any of those guys. I do want to mention, we talked about Freddie Freeman a little earlier, and the numbers are really disappointing from last season for Freddie Freeman. 81 runs, 89 RBI. Makes no sense because he hits in the middle of the order for the friggin' Dodgers and he hit 282. He slugged 476. That should be more than 81 runs and 89 RBI. I think that's really fluky, those counting stats being too low. And for the first 100 games of the year, so it's before he gets hurt, really, he was on pace to hit 26 home runs, and he was on pace to have well over 200 combined runs and RBI, right? As things fall apart for him a little bit down the stretch, he ends up falling short of all those numbers. But we already talked about how they're saying, oh, we're going to give Freddie Freeman a day off here and a day off there. If that allows him to keep that pace he had in the beginning of the season, we're talking about a player who, once again, is one of the best first basemen in baseball, right? Like Freddie Freeman has been incredibly reliable, and sure, it's not sexy because he's probably not going to hit 30 home runs, but he's so reliable, and he's coming at a strange discount because of how things finished for him last season. I think he's a player you need to keep high on your board. I think as you're heading into drafts, you need to know how you feel about Corbin Carroll. So the thing about Corbin Carroll, obviously he was one of the top prospects in baseball. He actually probably got cut at some point last season in your leagues, in a 12-team league, because, in the first half, he hit 2 home runs, right? He had 76 WRC plus. He was just really bad. And then over the final 76 games of the season, he was very, very good. He hit 20 home runs in that stretch, right? Now, the narrative, I'm hesitant to do this because it seems too easy. And analysis is rarely ever this easy. But man, when he hurt his shoulder, the power evaporated. And as he got healthy, it came back. And it's so convenient that I don't trust it. But it's an incredibly convenient narrative that explains why he exploded towards the end of last season as the shoulder gets healthy. The steep drop off in his performance in 2023 pretty much aligns exactly with when he gets hurt. It's really hard not to think that this was an injury problem, right? An injury and adjustment, an injury combined with a little bit of adjustment makes this ugly, ugly slump, and then he fixes it. Right now, he does sort of tail off right at the end of last season in terms of power. But man, Corbin Carroll, it's going to be really hard to ignore him. And I think if you believe there was something more than just the injury, then you probably can't take him at his current price. Corbin Carroll being drafted too high if you believe there was more to it than the injury. But if you just believe it's the injury, I think you're very, very smart to grab him in the second round of your drafts. I also want to call out in this tier Yeah, I really wish I could be talking about how I'm higher than everyone on Jackson Churio, but I'm not. Technically, I'm lower than him, even though I ranked him in the top freaking 20. I love Jackson Churio. I think we saw him grow throughout the course of last season, and he's going to be amazing. But the guys I actually want to call out just a little bit are Rafael Devers and Austin Riley. So I rank Austin Riley 17th, Rafael Devers 18th, and I actually move that. That's a little above where their ADP is. And it's not so much because of them specifically, and it has more to do with third base. And with third base, obviously, like it's I'm not saying it's like a weak position, right? Like those are the second and third baseman. There's another one that's going to be in the next tier with Jazz Chisholm, but then there's quite a big drop off at third base. And you don't see another one for quite some time. So I think there's a very, very good strategy to take one of these top 5 third basemen. So, or maybe it's 6, but Jose Ramirez, Ellie De La Cruz, Vlad Guerrero Jr. in some formats is third base eligible. You get Jazz Chisholm Jr. and you also get these two Endeavors and Riley. And I think there's a very good strategy in shallow leagues to really try to target getting one of those guys because their floor is the ceiling of the rest of the tier, in my view. So you really want to focus on grabbing one of those early third basemen if you can, and these two represent a good opportunity to do so. I totally believe in Austin Riley. He had a weird rough start, as did plenty of guys in Atlanta. I don't know what was going on. I don't know what they put in their water that made everyone kind of off to start the last season, but Riley really kind of turned it into gear before he got hurt. He got hurt at a very inconvenient time because he was really coming back. Rafael Devers, yeah, I know he's probably a little disgruntled about some of the position talks, but if he's in the lineup, he is one of the elite, third basemen in baseball with a stick. So I really like targeting one of those two if they fall to you drafts, or at the very least, one of those top 5 or 6 guys at third base to try to lock that in, because it can really give you an advantage over the rest of your league because of how much better they are than the rest of third base. Not that the rest of third base is bad, but like Alec Boehm's ceiling is just like worse than the floor of those guys, right? Yeah, sure, there's some upside. Like maybe Royce Lewis stays healthy for a whole season, right? But like probably not if we're going to be realistic, right? Alex Bregman, I like Alex Bregman, but his ceiling is not the same as the top 6 guys at this position. So they represent it's a shelf. It's a steep drop off after that top grouping, that top 2 groupings or so of third baseman. So yeah, I really like targeting them in drafts.
We'll take a quick break. We'll get back with the last 2 tiers here, or not the last 2 tiers, rather. The last 2 tiers we'll cover today. And we'll be back right after these messages.
I'll go faster.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. We got another 8 minutes. It should be fine. I lost my scroll. Hold on. I got to scroll back to tier 4 to figure out. Okay, perfect. Welcome back to Hacks and Jacks. Brett Ford here with Scott Chu, the author of The Hitter List. We're working through our tiers here in the top 300 hitters. Scott, we're on tier 4. It starts with Athletics outfielder Brent Rooker, and it works all the way down to number 31, Kyle Schwarber. It goes kind of from utility player to utility player, with a lot of fun stuff in between. Talk to me about tier 4. Give me a couple shout outs of guys you really like in this tier.
So I was so skeptical on Brett Rooker coming into 2024. Because the guy we saw in 2023 hit 30 home runs, but it was this classic, like swings really hard, misses a lot, got to 30 home runs, but it was super streaky. Rooker changed in 2024. This wasn't just like, he kind of just got a little bit better than he was in 2023. Brett Rooker became he picked up a skill set that's much more repeatable than what we saw in 2023, right? So Rooker's strikeout rate, from July 1st to the end of the season, Brent Rooker only struck out 23.6% of the time, right? He never has a 20-game rolling strikeout rate above 30% starting from July 1st to the end of the season, right? That big change because in 2023, pretty much his entire season was over 30%, right? Brent Rooker became a much, much better decision maker, became much better at avoiding strikeouts. This is a player who I think it's very repeatable what he did. This was one of the top hitters in baseball. The fact that I'm ranking him 21st, it feels too low, right? I feel like I should have him even higher. and I'm higher on him than the rest of the market, I'm ending up with Brent Rooker everywhere. I think you should too, because I think he's going to be a absolutely solid power source for you. Now, other end of the spectrum, I want to talk about the bottom of this tier, and that's Kyle Schwarber, because Kyle Schwarber gets a bad rap, right? First of all, Kyle Schwarber, I have nothing new to tell you about Kyle Schwarber. You already know everything there is to know about what Kyle Schwarber is, right? He's going to strike out a bunch. He's going to walk a bunch. He's going to hit 40 home runs, and he's going to put up a bunch of counting stats. And it's going to be, I used to call these heartbeat hitters, right? Because it's very up and down. Schwarber at times, there's going to be 2-week periods where people are like, Kyle Schwarber's, he's a scrub. He's terrible. He's hitting 100 over the course of the last 3 weeks. And then you're going to be like, for over the last 3 weeks, Kyle Schwarber has an OPS that starts with 2, right? Like 2 point, whatever. It's just going to be unbelievable, which it's not actually possible to have that, but he'll try. Kyle Schwarber. And the thing is, number one, if you're in an OBP league, Kyle Schwarber's in your top 15, right? He's approaching top 10 in terms of hitters in OBP because of that walk rate. But that low batting average, I get it. It hurts you. But here's the thing. If you are in a categories league, like a head-to-head categories, batting average is already extremely fluky, right? Because in a roto league, it's your final batting average when everything is said and done, right? So Schwarber's 210 batting average is really going to hurt you. But in a categories league, your batting average resets every week. And Schwarber's streakiness means, yes, there are weeks where he's going to hit 100, right? And there are weeks where he hits like 500, right? Schwarber carries your team for weeks. I love Schwarber in these head-to-head style leagues because his batting average hurts me a lot less because it resets every single week as opposed to being a drag on you for the entire season. So these rankings are technically for that format, and that's why I rank Schwarber 31st. And in builds where in those head-to-head category leagues, I'm not saying you should always punt batting average, but it's a very easy strategy to pick up that won't burn you, right? Because you don't need to be a top 3 batting average team. In Roto, you need to have representation across the board. And when you punt, there's a lot more pressure on your other categories. But in head-to-head categories, if you're punting batting average every week, you're still going to win it a lot, actually, right? You're not actually going to lose it every single week because those guys get hot. Kyle Schwarber gets hot, right? You're going to win sort of, by hook or by crook. You're going to win a chunk of those batting average weeks, even if you're not trying to. So don't let Kyle Schwarber fall too far, especially in that format.
Yeah, you talk about Schwarber's average, especially in the head-to-head categories leagues. I'll talk about his counting stats. There were only 6 players in Major League Baseball who finished with 100 runs and 100 RBIs last year. Of course, it's the usual suspects. It's Shohei Ohtani, Bobby Witt Jr., Aaron Judge, Jose Ramirez, Juan Soto, and Kyle Schwarber. So he's in elite company as far as counting stats go, and hopefully he can keep that up in 2025. Let's move on to Tier 5. Tier 5 ranges from number 32, Texas Rangers shortstop Corey Seager, all the way down to number 41, Los Angeles Dodgers outfielder Teoscar Hernandez. Give me a couple guys here in this tier that you really like this year before we wrap up for this pod.
I'm never going to pass up an opportunity to talk about O'Neal Cruz. Look, when a dude can hit the ball 122 miles an hour, I want him on my fantasy team because that is an elite skill that most people on this planet cannot and never will do, right? Cruz swings really, really hard. He's got sort of a Giancarlo Stanton-y approach to him, which has its ups and downs. But we did see Cruz take a nice step forward last season in his contact ability. He's never going to be an elite contact maker, but he grows throughout the season last year. And by the end of it, he's sort of hovering around this like league average to 75th percentile contact ability guy. That version of O'Neal Cruz, that's a special player, right? So in the second half, Cruz, he peels off some of those strikeouts, that contact rate growth, it's contact ability growth, a little different than contact rate, contact ability, because that's that contact ability metric that we've got. It's awesome. What it does isn't just say like, oh, how often did you make contact? It's how likely were you to make contact with the actual pitches you received, right? It doesn't treat all pitches the same. the difficult to hit pitches, you get more credit for hitting those, right? And you get less credit for hitting the pitches that everybody should hit, right? So O'Neal Cruz, he improves his ability to make contact. We know he's going to be aggressive, right? And he doesn't make better decisions throughout the year. What actually happens is he just gets better at making contact, which is totally fine. I don't care which one of the two happens, right? Either be better at making contact or make better decisions so that you don't swing at stuff that's hard to hit. Either one of those is fine. I'll take growth in either one. O'Neal Cruz showed growth in contact ability. If he can bring that into this coming season, he hit 277 for the second half last year. This is a special player. This is a guy who, this is a guy who can hit 30 home runs, right? Projections won't show that, but this is elite power. He can swing the bat harder than just about anyone, right? The sentence I use here, it's not bad to shoot for the moon on a 26-year-old who has 100th percentile bat speed, 97th percentile barrel rate, and 88th percentile sprint speed. The guy who can swing the hardest, who can hit it the hardest, and who can run the fastest, right? Give me that guy, right? A little bit of backyard logic here, right? Like schoolyard picking the teams. Yeah, I'll take the guy who can throw it the hardest, run the fastest, hit it the furthest, right? That's O'Neal Cruz. I think you should absolutely be in on that. And for another young player to talk about, James Wood, huge fan. He was a top 40 hitter for most of the second half of last year. And if you go to the article and do nothing else, Control F James Wood, look at what this guy does and how he grows throughout the season. I got some charts on his contact ability in 2-strike counts, and his contact ability against breaking balls. James Wood is already an elite decision maker. He showed that in the minor leagues. He showed it in the major leagues. The fact that he got so much better at making contact, basically starting from like this one of the worst in the league to making contacts to going up to 75th percentile. So well above average in making contact. That growth last season in some of the toughest scenarios, breaking balls, 2-strike counts, that shows me this could be a very special player as soon as this year. So I rank James Wood just ahead of Wyatt Langford, ahead of Michael Harris, ahead of Teoscar Hernandez. I think there's a very special player here that we could see very, very soon. Love taking a chance on him.
Yeah, James Wood as a breakout candidate is a popular take, but it's something that obviously the charts and the metrics back up. So somebody to be really excited about in that Washington Nationals outfield.
Well, and he's like 6'7", great decision, man. I mean, it's everything you want, right? Like, yeah, give me the big, strong dude who knows how to take a walk. Yeah, absolutely. Every time.
Well, Scott, we made it through 5 tiers of the top 300 hitters. We've got a couple more podcasts until the official opening day. But for now, we'll be back next week, diving deeper into this list, getting into some more tiers and talking more baseball. Looking forward to chatting with you again in a week from now.
Absolutely. Glad to be talking baseball again. We're getting ready for the regular season, and there's so much more to discuss. I've got so many more players that I can just ramble on and on about because of how much I love them. And now someone has to listen. Unfortunately, it's you, but you'll get through it. You'll be fine.
Well, so far, so good, but we'll see how it goes. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the flip side. This has been Hacks and Jacks with Brett Ford and Scott Chu.